because I'd come from such a dysfunctional homes, I never really understood what love actually meant, unconditional love, And when I had this child, and I just knew in a heartbeat that I would just lay my life down for this tiny little thing in my arms, and I just loved it more than I loved my own life, I just realised that that's how God loves me.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death.
So welcome, Natasha. It's good to be talking with you.
Thank you.
Tell everyone where you're from and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I live in New Zealand, and I live in a little place called Taranaki, which is, well, it's actually not that little, but it is in the scale of New Zealand.
Right.
And my husband and I have moved out from, we used to live on the coast, and we've moved about 35 to 40 minutes inland,
Yep.
just since the last lockdown. So once we got out of the last lockdown, we decided we didn't like being locked down in the city. That wasn't very fun. So we've come out, and we now have 10 acres out in the country that we are trying to get up and running for food, and
That's a wise thing to do these days.
Yeah.
So you've been with us. We've known each other for quite a while now, relatively decent time, and we've shared a little bit together. But I've never heard your full testimony, and if you'd like to just start where you feel is appropriate and try and bring out some of the things that really you feel are important in the movement that is going on in the world right now with us and others.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So my parents were, my mum's parents were Catholic, and
Right.
she was raised a Catholic, and they lived in England. And my uncle moved to Australia, and he met some Adventists while he was still a
Right.
Catholic. And so they started having, obviously, some conversation around some of the things that they each believed. And he had some questions. So then he would speak to my granddad, and my granddad would then go to the Catholic priests and ask these questions. And he didn't get any suitable answers, and he wasn't happy with that, because he was a very devout person. So he definitely stood on sola scriptura. So he struggled with that. So they all moved their family and came to Australia.
Okay.
And became Adventists because they were convicted that was the truth. So I was actually born in Australia, and I'm the third generation Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh, that's good.
So my parents moved to New Zealand when I was 2, and so I've lived here ever since. And then my family was born. The rest of my family was born here, my brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
So I do come from a background of Adventism.
Right.
But one thing I can say about my childhood growing up, and I guess a lot of people can probably resonate with this, is that you can have religion in the home, but it doesn't mean you have Christ in the home.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was really my experience growing up. There was a lot of forms of religion, but I didn't really ever know God. And in fact, when I was 6 years old, I remember thinking that I didn't really want to serve God because I didn't really understand him, and I didn't think he was very nice.
Okay.
That was just in my 6-year-old mind of what I could work out, and I couldn't really, and I didn't like my Christian home. I didn't think it was very I didn't think it was very Christ-like from my mind of what I thought I should have. I don't mean to put my parents down. They just were living how they were living. Me and my brother, we used to be able to, we didn't really go to church. We had church at home because I don't really know why, actually. It was just the way it was. And we would be allowed to go for a walk on Sabbath. Like all the adults would go and have a sleep in the afternoon, and we would be allowed to go for a walk, but we weren't allowed to play. So occasionally we'd get followed to make sure we weren't playing. So it was that kind of, and if we were caught playing, whatever that was, when you're 10 or whatever, we'd have to write out the 10 Commandments. So it was kind of that. It just wasn't appealing, as a child, and I actually really didn't like it at all. And I had step parents, and there was all sorts of things going on. So when I was sort of 14, I started to rebel against it all, because I started to get a mind of my own, and a voice then. And I just went absolutely out of the church, went crazy actually, just because I just wanted to break free from what felt like I don't know, it just felt really oppressive.
Yeah.
And so I went down to Christchurch for a bit to live with my dad. My parents didn't know what to do. My mum didn't know what to do with me up here, so she sent me down there. And then I got into trouble down there. He didn't know what to do with me, so he sent me back. And by then, I had a new step parent who wasn't a Christian, and we moved out into a farm, and I hated it all, and I just left home at 15. So I just sort of thought, I'm tired of this. I don't want anything to do with it. So I just went way out. I used to party all the time, drink. I didn't really care about anything. I didn't have a lot to really, I didn't have a lot of motivation or anything to do well or do anything, go anywhere. I just didn't want to be at home. So I just went a bit crazy out there. But it's funny, I remember, even when I was completely out in the world and very alone, I did feel very alone, because I was very young still. I would go to parties, and I would have been drinking, and like a lot, and I would remember having conversations about God, and I would be defending him and telling people about him, even though I didn't want to live or want to know him. I just knew that he existed, and part of me just knew that he needed to be referenced, even though I didn't have a relationship with him. And so I would be having these conversations and talking about creation and all sorts of things at parties, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. And one thing I never did is I never took the Lord's name in vain. I never felt comfortable doing that, even though it was so prevalent. Well, actually, that's not true. I tried it once to see if I could fit in with everybody else, because everyone else used to say it, and I couldn't live with the guilt of trying it. I was like, never again, never ever again am I ever. So in the back of my mind, I always had a reverence for God and a regard for him.
Yeah. I guess like that just rubs off on the stories you hear as a child, whether the religion was, correct. The exposure to the Bible still has an influence, that lasts. And that's, I guess you carried that with you, and that's good. I can't say I did what you did, but it's really nice to hear that you did, in spite of the fact of how you were living.
Well, I only put it down to the Lord.
Yeah.
I look back over my life, my childhood, and I see that the Lord really was my parent. He provided a horse for me to use when I was young. I was only just like 8, 9-year-old girl, and a gentleman down the road offered me free use, me and my friend, of a horse. So every night I'd ride this horse, and he just looked after me and blessed me in many ways, because he knew there was a void there. And so when I look back, it makes me sad that I didn't know him, and that I went through that time. But it also makes me really appreciate that he is a God of love, and understood that a lot of it was out of my control as a child, and so he kept wooing me. And so I got married. I met a guy when we were partying and carrying on, and I was living that life, and I got married. And the funny thing is 3 days before my marriage, my wedding, I kind of freaked out, and I knew that I shouldn't marry this guy. Not that there was anything wrong with this person, but he wasn't a Christian, and neither of us were at the time, but I just had a feeling it was just not the right thing to do. But I didn't have a walk with the Lord, so I wasn't strong enough to, to just call it off and try and do the right thing. So I ended up unequally yoked. But I didn't want any children either. So I didn't like families. I didn't have a family really. I didn't like.
Yeah.
I
When your experience is not probably good, then you don't want you associate it with your experience as a child, and you don't want that. Yeah.
I don't want to bring a child into this world.
Yeah, that's what I felt exactly the same way.
It's funny, how you kind of do that. And
yeah, but that's actually, right in a sense, because you don't want them to have to go through what you did.
No.
So
absolutely
it's,
didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I absolutely didn't. But the funny thing is the Lord had other plans because I fell pregnant with my son, and I call him my miracle baby because the Lord used him to bring me back to the Lord.
Right.
And yeah, when I fell pregnant with him, it was the weirdest feeling. I was really shocked because I wasn't trying to fall pregnant, and I was stunned actually. And I was telling my husband at the time, I said to him, I'm pregnant. Like eek. And as I was telling him, I just felt the smile coming across my face, and I just thought, wow, I'm going to be a mum. I'm actually going to be a mum, and it just changed something in me that I didn't know was there.
Yeah,
and
right.
While I was pregnant, I decided that I wanted my child to know the Lord.
Yeah.
And I wanted to raise him so that he could make a choice, but he had to have the knowledge on both sides, to make the choice. And so I became like a sponge. Actually, the first thing I did was I opened my Bible. And this is really interesting as to where I am now, this little thing that the Lord did for me. I opened my Bible and I started reading from the start. I thought, I'll start in Genesis. I've never read the thing from start to finish. Right. And I got to the firmament I couldn't work out what it was. Because of my views at the time. I had never ever heard of a flat earth or anything like that. I couldn't work out what the firmament was, and I was so frustrated.
You got to the 6th verse.
I know, that was it.
Yeah, and then bang. Most people just keep reading, but no, you stop there. That's interesting.
It was, and I was just so angry with the Lord. I had no right to be, but I just was, and I said to him, I'm trying to read your word. I've gotten this far in, and I know the firmament, because I was thinking flat, I'm not flat, I was thinking firm. Firmament must be the earth, firm. But then it said that the dry land was the earth, and I was like, well, it's not the earth, so what is it? I just couldn't. So I shut my Bible because I was frustrated. But it's good. The Lord was leading me on a path, and I realized that now. But at the time, and so I shut the Bible, and because I was Adventist, I knew all about spirit of prophecy, you see. And I was raised in a home actually where it was we were anti it. We were told that she was a false prophet, even though we were Adventists. So it was very strange. But anyway, somehow I got hold of a book called, it's a compilation now, I know, called The Story of Redemption.
Yeah, I know that one.
Oh, and that changed my life, that book. That one book. Yeah, absolutely changed my life. I just sat there, and it might have been because I was pregnant. I was also quite emotional. But honestly, I actually was introduced to God in that book and his son. And I was shown, the bit that struck me the most was when the people had been complaining against Moses when they were in the wilderness, and especially Miriam.
Yeah.
And God came down, it says that God came down personally and stood up for Moses.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that and just crying and crying and crying, because I just thought, I can't believe the God of heaven has come down to defend his his righteous person, this one person, you know, that was trying to do his work. And it just touched me in a way that I hadn't really understood. And that was just one story of many in that book.
Yeah, you seem to like focus on some really interesting points that a lot of people might not, you know, get stuck on the firmament. that happen. That's interesting. I was just yeah.
Yeah, I understand it now.
Yeah,
all these years later, I'm like, of course I'm stuck on the firmament. Because I mean, obviously I wouldn't know what that was. You know? And it's funny, when I was 6, this is another thing. The Lord worked with me so early in my life. I see it, you know. And I drew a picture. I drew a globe, you know, the blue and green marble that you you see. And I drew on the top, I drew a city with all, you know, all the buildings sitting on the top. Yeah. And I knew I lived on the bottom. So I drew myself upside down and all the houses and things on the bottom. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, that's not right. It just can't be right. I was only 6, you know, and I sort of thought, that's not right. No. Something's not right here. I know I'm not upside down. But, you know, what do you do when you're 6 years old?
Yeah, well, 6-year-old sort of seems to reason better than someone that's got a degree in astrophysics, unfortunately.
Well, the Lord says, you know, unless we become like little children.
That's right.
You know, can't enter the kingdom. And I sort of thought, and so I have all these different things where through my life, I can just now look back and think, Lord, you're just amazing in the things that you've done. And even just as a young little girl, he was working with me and just showing me, planting these little seeds in my mind that would prepare me for later for accepting these truths.
Right.
You know, and it's incredible, really. You know, and it's not really a big deal. I don't have like this big wahoo moment where the Lord did something life-changing exactly, where I remember the pivot point, except for having my child. But I see all these little bits where he's just been this constant companion and constant guide through my whole, you know, existence.
That's right. Yeah. You often don't recognize it in the moment, but you do years later. Like I remember things myself that I knew something important happened in that moment and it was significant, but I didn't see God's hand until later. You know, because I hadn't really desired to at that point, you know. Right. But once you desire, then you start to see his fingerprints all over your life like that. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember when I had my son, you know, I'd never really understood God's love for me until I had my child. You know, that was the turning point for me where, you know, because I'd come from such a dysfunctional homes, I never really understood what love actually meant, unconditional love, you know. And when I had this child, and I just knew in a heartbeat that I would just lay my life down for this tiny little thing in my arms, and I just loved it more than I loved my own life, I just realised that that's how God loves me. And that he gave me this child to teach me that, because I wouldn't have known if I'd never had children.
Right, yeah.
And so in that way, it's funny, when Dre was 11, he said to me, Mum, what does it feel like to love a child? And I said to him, well, the only way I can explain it, hun, is that if your life was in danger and I could save your life and it would cost me mine, I wouldn't even think about it. It wouldn't even be a choice I'd have to make. You know, it just would be automatic. I would just save you. That's the only thing I could think of to explain it to him.
Yeah.
And that's what the Lord did with us. You know, when sin came and Jesus said, I'll go, that's what he did.
That's right.
I'll go.
Yeah, and you know, and it says when we were enemies, not just when if it was reciprocated love, it was actually love that wasn't reciprocated.
Yeah. It's a love you can't understand.
Yeah.
But you understand it when your child, you know, like your child's not always well behaved. Sometimes they do things, you know, and they, you know, especially as they get older, they might say something or they do something that's hurtful, you know, and it doesn't change one little bit how you feel about them. But it was quite interesting because I started reading everything I could get my hands on, Spirit of Prophecy, because I just wanted to learn. It's like this whole new world of books and information was opened up to me. I read Great Controversy, I read Desire of Ages. I just read everything I could get my hands on. And I wasn't going to church at this time because I was still pregnant. And I just wanted to, I felt like, it was really weird. I felt like I needed to catch up before I went to church so that I actually knew what Adventists believed and what I was talking about. And so by the time I actually got to go to church, I was so excited because I love Bible study. I was so excited to go there, and I thought, right, I'm going to end up learning so much. I can't wait to go. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? So I got there, and I was just so surprised. I was like, people didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And within a very short time, I'd actually had Dre by then. And within a very short time, I was taking the Sabbath school.
Right.
Yeah. It got to that where I was like, well, people would say, well, would you like to take the lesson? Because you seem to have an understanding on this, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Lord, he just prepared me.
Yeah.
Even in that 9-10 months to then, go to church and teach
them. I guess it just shows, like, when you have an experience with God like you did, then it doesn't take long. You once you understand His character and His love, then you can teach others, you know. And if you don't, you could study your whole lifetime and have nothing really to contribute.
Well, you read Ellen White, and honestly, you can't read those writings and not learn.
No,
you know,
that's right.
You can't. No, you have to learn something from it. You know, and that's why, I mean, it's the lesser light to lead us to the greater light, and that's exactly what it did for me. It served its purpose.
Absolutely. I have a similar story. I actually had rejected the Bible most of my life, and someone gave me a Great Controversy, and I read that, and it actually, the first part, which is about the history of the church, it actually gave me peace on the truth of Christianity, or the initial purity of it, because I let all these lies saying that the Catholic Church created it. But then I read that and I actually accepted it, but I still kind of like sidelined it because my beliefs were still good. But then I kept coming back to it, and it just convicted me so deeply. And I'd never touched a Bible, for years before that. And then after finishing that book, the Bible was 100% truth, and there was no questions whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it is a powerful.
That sounds exactly like what happened with myself. I can relate. It sounds very, very similar. I find it very interesting that we're so what's the word? We're so far along, 6,000 years along in the history of sin, that that we need Spirit of Prophecy to bring us to the Bible.
But
God will do what it takes.
Yeah, and there's just so many misconceptions that are placed over what the Bible teaches, like eternally burning hell, the Trinity, the globe. Like when you've got these misconceptions about what the Bible teaches, you actually expect to find that in there, so you don't want to read it. But when you read, and the Bible is, it's harder to read than the Spirit of Prophecy, because the Spirit of Prophecy is very well explained, but the Bible is very densely compact, and you have to sit there and think about it. But that when you have something to just shake off all those erroneous conceptions that have been placed over the Bible, it sort of makes it more appealing, if you know what I mean.
Totally. Absolutely. It worked for me like that. It made it appealing. It made God appealing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So many things about God that I didn't understand, and I still don't. I've got so much to learn. I'm not claiming to have learnt it all in that time, but He just caught me up to speed enough that I could actually read the Bible and that I could teach others. even though I felt
Exactly.
like I still had a very limited sphere, but he could use me, through that. And he did. And I got right into going to church, and I just lived for Sabbath school. I just go there. And then all of a sudden, I'd come home. My marriage was very tricky because I was unequally yoked. So I would leave church from having a great Sabbath school or Sabbath, and I'd come home and I'd have AC/DC blaring out all my windows when I got home. So it was like, it was always like a real spiritual battle. And so, my children were in the middle of that. And but anyway, so I ended up, I had my daughter as well. So that was a real blessing. She was amazing. And I started going on, because I was at home a lot more. I started going on these forums, Christian forums, to discuss things, because I couldn't really go to Bible studies and things like that as easily with small children. Yep. But I still had this real drive to share and to study, and to discuss and find truth. And so I started on this Christian forum, and it must have been Adventism, or I can't even remember what it was. But I remember there was this one fellow who started to bring up the Trinity truth to me. And of course, I'd never looked at it, and I never had any understanding of it. And I was shocked when he first brought it up, because I thought, what? I was defending the Trinity, because I was like, this is crazy. Okay. Why are you saying this about God? This is an obvious biblical truth.
How long ago was this? Sorry, what just now?
I would have been 23.
Right.
Yeah, okay. 23. No, I hadn't had my daughter. Sorry, I had my daughter after this. Yeah, I've mixed up my times. Yeah, when I had Dre, he was only very, very young, like 3 months old.
Yeah. Okay.
And I started to, and that's when I was having this. That's why I was at home a lot, because I was at home with a newborn.
Yeah.
And so I started these forums, and this one guy just really challenged everything I said, and I was hunting through the Bible, everything I could get my hands on to answer his scripture that he was throwing at me.
Yeah.
And honestly, it troubled me like you wouldn't believe, because he just ran rings around everything that I said. Everything, he just had the truth. But I couldn't quite see that yet. But I just thought I can't be in this church that's holding to a doctrine that's not biblical. It's just my understanding. That's what I was thinking. I just don't have the depth of understanding that the church leaders were. I need to go to people who can give me this understanding, and then I'll be able to come
the correct Trinitarian understanding.
That's right. I was like, well, I said, why would a denomination hold to a doctrine that's not biblically sound? Of course they aren't, in my mind. I just don't understand. Yeah, the proper explanation here. There's some more evidence in the Bible that I'm just not aware of. Someone will teach me about that if I go ask. Couldn't find anyone to actually even talk about it with me. So I went to, that's when I went to another ministry, SDA one, offshoot, outside of mainstream SDA. And that's where I remember I went to a camp. I talked to the leader of this place, and I said to him, look, I really want to come and discuss the Godhead, with you. I'm having a conversation with a fellow. I can't answer him. I need to know some answers. Can you help me? Can you sit down and have a Bible study with me? And he said, yeah, no worries. So I went to this camp.
Yeah.
And I get to this camp, and no one is interested in talking to me. I'm 23. I've got a 3-month-old baby. No one wants to talk to me about it. Everyone was just really stern and looked at me funny, and I felt really strange being there. And one time, I remember I walked up to there was a group of them having a conversation. I thought, oh yeah, I'll catch them off guard a little bit. I'll just go up and just ask them, And as I was walking up, there was a guy there. He was a guest speaker from the Solomon Islands, and he sort of looked at me funny, and I said hi, and he said, do I know you? Have I met you before? And I said, no, this is the first time I've ever come here. I don't think I've seen you before. And he said, oh, okay. Didn't really say anything. And I tried to have a conversation with these guys. All the leaders just shut me down. I couldn't get anybody to even open it up with me. And anyway, that night I didn't go to the meeting, and I just had this horrible feeling. It felt like a really heavy, oppressive spirit in the place, and I just wanted to actually flee.
Yeah,
So
right.
in the morning, but I had Dre, so he was small and he needed to sleep him. So I stayed the night, and in the morning I picked up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I just left.
Right.
And when I got home, I spoke to a friend who had stayed, and she had said that evening at the meeting that I didn't go to, this guy from the Solomon Islands had stood up and warned everybody about me, and said that he'd had a dream, and in his dream he'd seen me, and he'd been shown by an angel that I was a witch and that I was an agent of the evil one, and to have nothing to do with me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
It sounds like the dream that Eliphaz had when he was talking to Job.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I was a bit shocked, but I knew that's why I needed to leave, because it was so demonic there.
Yeah,
the
right.
activity was demonic, and I was so young and naive. Obviously I wouldn't go there now. I wouldn't bother. But at the time I was just young, and the Lord just protected me from it, because I didn't go to the meeting that night. I mean, that would have been horrendous. If I had, I would have been singled out. Which, I mean, if he'd wanted me to go through that, that would have been fine. But he sort of protected me from that, and I didn't go.
No, that was good. You weren't there. That was, yeah. They don't. Those sort of things don't do you any good. They just, like, you might get through it, but it's traumatic.
Well, it's just a bit shocking, because you sort of think, wow, I'm just trying to get somebody to look at this topic. Is that too much to ask in a Christian realm?
You weren't saying, you weren't trying to teach them the Godhead. You were just asking them to teach you.
I was trying to defend it.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Yeah,
I was trying to defend it to this.
You're on their side. Yeah.
I was on their side, and I was saying to them, this guy is confusing me and running. He has an answer for everything, and everything's making sense his side. And I don't understand.
But I guess Satan knew that you were going to find the truth, because you weren't interested in their sophistries. So that's why you had to get out of there,
Yeah, well, when I found out that the next day, I just sort of thought, wow, Lord, you have led me into some truth here, and I need to look at it. Right. Because I just knew that Satan just did not want me to find out that truth, and he didn't want that being brought up at this meeting where it might, stir up some discussion about it. He just suppressed it like a big wet blanket. So that actually solidified me in it. And so then I went the other way. I was like, okay, Lord, you've given me this experience. Now I know that that's the truth. You have to teach me, show me what, I've got stuff to unlearn here, because I've never studied this out for myself until now. And so then I just went on this big, search for truth, and I found it. The Lord was good. And I never sort of, even though it's really weird, I stayed in the church because I wanted to share it. I had that thing of like, well, I need to tell people about this.
After you accepted the truth about God and rejected the Trinity.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't really realize, how Babylonian at the time the church was. I just thought there must be some kind of misunderstandings here. People must be like me, just don't know,
Well, God uses that naivety for his purposes,
he does.
It's good. Like, he wants you to think like that. He wants you to think the best of people too, and it's good to do that. Give them the benefit of the doubt, and it's, because a lot of people tend to just, once they learn something, they just shine everyone, but that's not how, that's not how you see the gospel work. The disciples, and they went to the Jews for a long time until it was over. God wants us to give them the chance. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Oh, you're fine. Well, it does. It doesn't really last that long, that kind of spirit, because before you know it, you're just kind of arguing with everybody.
Yeah.
Just controversy just comes up all the time, And then I started to get very convicted of, I can't actually fellowship with these people because it's not right, that they're worshipping a different God to me, and they're not prepared to look, many of them, not prepared to look. So, it became very, I was known as being very controversial, and just everywhere I went, even, it's funny because in between, I spent a long time in the church and then had my daughter, but then my marriage split up. And then, a bit later, I met the husband I'm married to now, and he's an Adventist, and he's gone through a bit of a roller coaster ride with me because he's not very confrontational.
Right, and because you're like extreme.
And, I'm the opposite, and I just have this thing that I will always say what I believe is the truth. You know, he doesn't think I should always say what I think is the truth, but sometimes it's just the way it is. It's just this thing that the Lord's put in me, and I can't control it.
Yeah, that's you were talking about when you were a kid, even when you were rebelling against your own home because of what you felt wasn't right. It's just now used for God's purpose, and that's a beautiful thing about the character traits that we have. They can be used for bad, and then they would just but then the same things can actually be turned for good purposes.
Absolutely. I think to myself, well, I don't actually ever want to change that bit about me. Maybe I could change the delivery, sometimes, because that's the other things that I need to work on as well. And and I understand that, and that's probably more what he's meaning.
Right. Yeah.
But sometimes I guess discernment is a good thing to have. But I think it will be very important in the near future to be able to stand up for the truth. And
absolutely. No,
I feel like the Lord's going to use his people, to do that.
Yeah.
But I got very disheartened for a while there. I almost gave up the faith. It sounds really bizarre probably, but it wasn't until I went through a stage of about maybe 4 years where I just got really disheartened because I really felt like I was the only one out there that really believed this stuff.
Okay, what do you mean? Which stuff specifically?
Well, in between that time of when I met, obviously I was married to Nige, and I was sitting on the floor in my lounge one time. I was just on my laptop looking at something or other, and I was on YouTube, and you know how when you look at one thing, it leads to another, and all sorts of things sort of pop up.
Right.
Well, I saw this meme, or it was not a meme, the clickbait kind of that you see over on the side, and it said, "Why don't pilots have to dip their noses as they fly around the globe?"
Okay, back when YouTube was actually recommending things like flat Earth.
Oh, you could find stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
You could find it, a dime a dozen videos, and you just get hits.
Yeah, right.
So that was quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like probably about 8 years ago. So, and I just sort of thought, oh man, what is this about now? And so I started, something I don't know, switched on again in my mind, and I sort of thought, something's not right here. Why don't they do that? Why don't they? So it just started, and because of the personality that the Lord has given me, I just can't rest until I have my answer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I went on a big deep dive there, and I was convinced in my mind. And then I did biblical flat Earth as well.
And
then I was like, oh yeah, the firmament. That's
you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I couldn't understand it.
So once you started seeing flat Earth, that sort of pulled you out of this little low point in your faith you're in. Is that what you're saying?
That put me into the low, because I really felt very isolated then. Now.
Right.
Yeah, that did the opposite actually. I wish it had done the other. Maybe I just had a very low faith at the time, and I got very discouraged because what discouraged me was that I had so much trouble sharing the Godhead truth with people. I thought people are never, ever going to understand this, the flat earth. They're just going to think I've completely looped the loop. No one's going to give me the time of day. And it was true. No one really did, couldn't really bring it up very much because people just would ridicule.
Yeah. And what were you in a Godhead group at this point?
No, I didn't have a Godhead group to join.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I was still in mainstream
Right.
organisation. We were very heavily involved with our church. We were in soup kitchens and vegetarian cooking classes and I worked at the school. We lived up on the property. There was lots of things that we were so involved with because my husband was very involved when we got married. So it just kind of spilled over into our lives. But I felt very, even though I was so busy with all this stuff, I felt really spiritually very alone. I felt like I really was the only person that had these beliefs. And I couldn't just shelve them to the back and carry on. So every time I would go to Sabbath school and there'd be a Sabbath school lesson and, it always mentioned the Trinity or mentioned something that wasn't right. And so I would be saying, well, that's not right. That's not biblical.
You'd be speaking up in the church
all the time. All the time, because I just couldn't sit there in silence, and people would just get so angry with me.
Well, when you sit in silence, you start to succumb to it.
Yeah.
You either have resistance, or you succumb. So you have to have go that way if you if you want to maintain your integrity.
Well, there's no way I was going to succumb. Just no way. Because I could see it was just so wrong. And just the fact, it used to get to me that people, and it still does, that people deny that Christ is God's son,
that some of them are just totally overt with it too. It's shocking.
Yeah, and it's like, well, God tells us, I don't know how many times in his Bible, so plainly, we just say, oh no, that's not true. It's like, so that used to really bother me. And so people would find me very hard work in the Sabbath school. They'd be like, you're just railroading the lesson and you're derailing everything. I'm like, everybody, this is like the first commandment. This is like the first commandment. This is not a side issue. If you don't know the God that you're worshipping, why are you even here?
Wow. You're a real troubler of Israel.
Big troubler. But, it's fine. I would rather be right with heaven than right with everybody here. But it was hard, and so I got very, very despondent. Even the controversy was coming into my own home, and my family, and everybody was just, even still now, except for my husband, all my family, they think I'm very controversial and have left the faith.
Oh, really? Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that many people can relate to that. I certainly can.
Yeah.
And there's some, anyone who joins our fellowship will have the same experience. It's just how it is, Yeah,
well,
it's becoming very narrow these days.
Yeah, it is. And but I actually started even I just lost all interest because I just thought, Lord, this is just too hard. I'm so alone with this. I'm fighting everybody all of the time and in every single circle. There's nobody, that I'm not in disagreements with. So I almost
that's what Elijah said really as well, I'm the only one,
And he was suicidal.
Yeah, he wanted to pray that he would die.
And I was the same, I left, I stopped going to church. I would go play volleyball on Sabbath. And I knew it was wrong, but I just was like, I don't care. And I did care. I did. Yeah. But, I just got to that point where I was just like, I just feel so alone. And then it was really interesting. It was right before the lockdown, actually, right before COVID all came. And that just flipped. I mean, that was just what I needed. But anyway, just before that is when I just, out of exasperation one day when I was quite annoyed with the Lord. And I said to him, there's just nobody out here who believes the same as me. And I opened up Google, and that's when I put in non-Trinitarian, SDA, flat earther. And I pushed search, and that's when earthen vessels came up.
Wow. I can't believe Google actually helped you.
Well, they don't now. I struggle to find you.
No.
It wasn't Google.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't
Amazing.
Google. I just
Yeah,
about
right.
fell off my chair.
No, it wasn't Google.
No, they do everything but help you in that area.
That's right.
And it was just like an answer. I just felt like the Lord just really heard, just, you know, when you just get to that low, desperate point where I just felt like giving up, actually, because it was just like, oh, it's only me. I'm sure there's nobody else in the world. I honestly felt that, you know. And so and then when I opened up your ministry, I was like, there's a whole bunch of people here who believe the same as me, you know. And I kept like, I'd go through the videos and I'd be like, there must be something that I'm going to disagree on. Surely they can't be, they can't have it all the same understanding as what I do. There's, you know, because there's always something, you know.
Yeah.
Most of the time. But
yeah,
no,
there
was nothing. And I was just like, Lord, this is incredible. Incredible.
Wow.
So, you know, here I am now looking at everything that you're putting out. And I've watched most videos probably 3 or 4 times. Just to, you know, and I've learnt so much. And then now having the fellowship of the Zoom meetings are a real blessing.
Yeah, our Sabbath, every Sabbath Zoom meetings. Yeah.
It's made me realize the importance of it, you know. I just sort of think I look at all the different things. Like my husband's starting to come around a little bit to it. You know, he's wanting to join. You know,
we've seen he's joined. I remember.
So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Your story is, I'm sure so many people could relate to that. Even if like having an Adventist upbringing, a lot of us don't, I don't, but regardless of your, you know, exposure to truth or error throughout your life, your availability or what your parents believed, or there's a similar quality that seems to run and exist even in you as a child among different places. Like it's true that later in life we change, but I think that, you know, a lot of the time you start to respond to God from a young age. Like probably everyone does, but those that get to, I guess, where you are now, they're able to recognize it, you know, that quality. It's really important that we recognize that too, because it's how you sort of begin to appreciate God, like as we were talking about at the start.
Well, it's like a relationship that he builds, you know, and that he initiates with you, you know, and you don't realize that it's building and that it's happening. And you're too young to understand that that's how God's communicating with you. But you seem to be a little bit receptive to it. You know, you don't really put it on the back burner all the time. I don't know, you acknowledge the little questions that he puts in your mind, and you sort of, I don't know, there must be a lot of people out there that do that.
I think everyone does, but they won't all acknowledge it, you know. It's like when God judges everyone after, you know, the resurrection, the second coming, they won't be condemned for like what they did. It's so much. It's for what they're rejecting God's invitations to repent, you know, and those conversations that he has with every single one of us, you know.
Yeah.
It's just,
even as a small child, like you say, always had that thing of just wanted to do what was right, you know, and if something was wrong, I was never a rule breaker. Even though I did break rules, I was never okay with it. You know, I didn't like to be on the wrong side of what was right. Always had this moral compass, even though I've done so many things wrong. And I would hate for anyone who knows me to see this and think that I'm saying that. I've always had a moral compass that I've followed. I haven't followed it. but it's always been there, you know, and had a very, very strong concept of what was right and what was wrong, right from very, very small, you know.
Well, that's beautiful. And, you know, I've spoken about this a lot, but it's just like not conforming to worldly customs, or that's the only quality that will save anyone in the last days, because the entire world, we're told, is going to worship the beast.
Yeah.
You know, and then if they don't worship, they'll be cut off from services, and then they'll be killed. But those who listen to their conscience and aren't willing to conform, to violate their conscience in order to conform, are the only ones that are going to make it into heaven, you know, through that period. It's just, and that's really what Paul's talking about when people that have a love for the truth, that you can't stand to not speak against error or go along with it.
Well, we're told, you know, that we should never give countenance to error. You know, and those sorts of things always pop in my mind when it comes up, because sometimes I have to admit, I'm like, oh Lord, should I say something here, or should I just let it go? But I've never been convicted to just let it go. You know, no. So no, this is not right. This is not true. People are being deceived, you know. People don't know.
That's right. And God needs people of diverse, I guess, dispositions also, you know. Like sometimes he needs someone who is like very bold, like Peter, you know. And other times he'll send John with Peter, who was maybe possibly a little bit more reserved, you know. And I think that that's an important thing in the church, to recognize those diversities of gifts and be able to acknowledge the other things.
Yeah.
Solomon said in Proverbs, there's a time to keep silence and there's a time to speak. And it's important to be able to recognize both of those times.
yeah. Absolutely.
You can really see as we're going forward how peculiar, you know, God's people are becoming. Like they are so separate from the world, from Babylonian religious systems, that it's just, you can just see that separation. And actually the world is bringing that about. They're forcing us out of society.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And we're happy to go out. We're actually fine with that, you know, like it's just, and it's even having the effect of flushing out those who want to know the truth and actually gathering them together in one place, you know. So like the Bible says, we can do nothing against the truth but for the truth.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful thing, you know, and it's exciting. It's great. It's actually, the more they do, the better it works for God's movement and his people.
Well, like I was saying to you before, COVID was the best thing that actually ever happened to me, because it snapped me out of this, you know, I was feeling very down in the dumps, you know, and feeling very despondent. And it just snapped me out of that. And I was like, Natasha, you need to wake up, you know, because if you carry on like this, you are lost.
Yeah, right.
I was just like, God has privileged me with so much truth. I had no time to be wallowing in self-pity like Elijah. I needed to wake up and start sharing this truth, and, you know, and being strong in my walk. Otherwise, I was, you know, and that's my kids as well. They'll be lost. And that's exactly how I was on the very first night of the lockdown, just sitting on the floor in my room, just couldn't believe what was happening. And I just like got up and I went and got my Bible and opened it to Revelation 13 and 17. And I was just like, okay, you need a refresher. Something is going on. And it's, I didn't think it was going to happen in my lifetime. Time to wake up.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's certainly high time to wake out of sleep.
Oh, man.
Absolutely.
Honestly, I don't know how anybody, I mean, because I was pretty Laodicean, I have to say, I was asleep, right. You know, willfully asleep too for that time, willfully.
Yeah.
And I don't know how anybody who claims to have any understanding of prophecy, the Bible, great controversy, anyone that has any SDA upbringing, I don't know how they can't see this world is just has changed.
Willfully ignorant. Where is the promise of his coming?
Yeah,
All things continue
as they
since the beginning of the creation.
yeah, absolutely. But I am just so grateful that God saw, had enough mercy on me to wake me up, and to just to get me alert again.
Well, Natasha, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure, I'm sure it'll be a blessing. And yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to add there at the end.
No, thanks for having me. I've had a great time. It's been lovely sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.